And I have to tell you a quarter story, but it could be.
Okay.
If I sit over and work at the Yankee there, it was as big as a donut.
Wow.
And it was external, where this little patient doctor was up in Memphis. And it appeared that he died because he couldn't find a patient. My law firm sued courts, and I'll tell you. Ready? Okay.
All right.
Welcome, everybody. Dennis is going to introduce the whole project, right?
Well, I think so. A couple of things. One, you're now here at Dialog with Bill Grimm, and we've been doing this.
That's not what it says, Don.
What does it
It
say?
says Dialogue with Bill and Dennis.
So we've been doing this now for what, a year and a half?
More than 2 years.
More than 2 years, and it's been great. And we're talking about trials and tribulations of raising capital and scaling businesses. And so today's program is going to be specifically that, about scaling businesses and mistakes that companies make in doing so. A couple of things I want to mention. This is a community event within the Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is all this week, and the big exchange is happening. So I'm wearing
Is
this
that why
t-shirt.
you're with
I'm a
a
thinker.
coat and tie?
I'm a thinker.
Okay.
And so there's one more workshop going on, which is, turns out I'm doing at 10:30, which is at the Day Building, Suite 500, at 10:30, about pitching, tips on pitching, and then there's I think the wrap-up event is at 2 o'clock at Rollins this afternoon, and there's an after party at Amber this evening. So, welcome to that. Secondly, we have Venture Pitch Orlando, which is the 16th of December. That's Tuesday night, and we're fortunate to, in cooperation with Scaling, or in concert with Scaling, Jeff Hoffman, who's just written this book called Scale. And some of you have probably already heard Jeff because he's a friend of Rollins and he's been to Orlando on
He
several
was
occasions.
one of the early, either co-founder or something.
Priceline.com.
And as usual, when the VCs come in, founders are out. But anyway.
So he's going to be here in Orlando on December 16th at Venture Pitch. He will do the keynote talk, and he'll be talking about scaling. And by the way, this is kind of an interesting book because it's not only about scaling your startup, but it's about scaling your career. And it's got a lot of interesting thoughts in here. So it's really for not only people that are building businesses, but building careers and freelancers and other creative professionals. And so that's the 16th of December, and we've opened up a discount for folks attending this event, and it's Rollins guests. So if you go to venturepitchorlando.com and you register Rollins guest, and it's, I think, $10 off from the $49 ticket price.
Okay.
So and you get great hors d'oeuvres from, I don't know, Arthur's or Puffin Stuff, and you get a drink with your ticket. So it's going to be a good event. Welcome everybody to attend. So, problems with scaling. Bill, I love these brain maps that Bill does.
$49 with a $10 discount if you mention Rollins? I don't know.
Rollins use this Rollins guest code.
Code.
Okay.
Can't put Hannity in or anybody else?
Yeah. All right, so difficulties with scaling.
No. Mistakes that kill.
Mistakes
That
kill scaling.
Kill.
Which are difficulties?
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for coming. We changed the time to 8:30, much to the chagrin, I think, of the 7:30ers, which I see a number of them here. But we wanted to experiment with a later time to see whether that helps people who want to come. That's the first thing. Second, you probably think we've gone upscale with the coffee. They have a policy campus-wide of no plastic bottles. Well, the business schools analyzed that to death and figured that costs a lot more than what we're doing now. Anyway, so now we're going to have to replace all the rugs every year because we have on everything. Anyway, when you're finished, would you please bring your coffee things out there and put it on the same table? Otherwise, believe it or not, yours truly has to do that. So, we're going to start with scaling. Now, we've been talking about raising capital from angel investors for 2 years. And all the challenges and the problems and opportunities. Well, we're going to talk today of what happens if you get up to a sustainable company, probably with the help of angel investors. And now you think you have the opportunity to really scale. You know, the old hockey curve that we all see, you're at that cusp, you think, and you think you can really start. And that's what we're going to talk about. Now, I have two different models here. One is a company that through either internally generated cash or help from friends and family or help from investors got to a self-sustaining mode. That's one. The second one is a young company that hasn't been self-sustaining yet, but has raised enough capital where the investors think it'll take it to a self-sustaining level. Keep in mind, no investor in their right mind wants to put capital into a company that you know the company's going to have to raise more capital before it gets to self-sustaining, or at least before it gets to a meaningful milestone. So that's also a scaling up company. But that company's on a continuous attempt to scale, whereas the self-sustaining company, of course, leveled out probably and now wants to really take off. So we're going to talk about mistakes. And I'm using a different mind map program, and you won't be able to see probably what I have up in the box. Those are notes from different aspects, but I'm hoping you can see the main things. So I'm going to ask you in the back corner, can you read oh, here's the test. Can you read what that is?
Cover your left eye.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's take a quick look at a preview of the kinds of mistakes that we typically run into. And I'm going to go into detail. No well-formulated objectives and a definitive strategy. Of all the companies I've worked for, I think I probably had two that I thought really met that challenge. Now, the CEO and founder typically has it up here, but has not communicated it to many other people. That is a problem. And so often, you say, what are your objectives? And they'll say, I want to achieve sales of $10 million in 3 years. Well, that's a wish, that's not an objective. We'll get to that, okay? Objectives have to be definitive, and the strategy to get there has to be definitive. Management team inadequate to execute the scale up. We talk about that so often. Young companies or even companies that are at the self-sustaining mode simply are almost always short of the management team that's necessary to scale up. Sorry. Almost always. So when you go to investors, well, what do you say? Well, the only thing you can't say, we're going to find a CFO. We're going to find a controller. We're going to find a marketing person. Because you don't typically have them on board. First, you can't probably afford that person. Second, if you pick somebody that you think would be dynamite, that person's crazy to join your company if you don't have the resources for that person to work with. So it's always a management team issue when you're getting ready to scale up. How do you do that? What happens if you don't do that? You fail. That's essentially the bottom line. And next one, try to fund the scale up with debt. That's suicide. You don't fund losses that are bound to occur in a scale up with debt. You bet your company. I'll come back to that. Start to scale without adequate capital. I should say without adequate equity capital, because debt's not going to do it. Now, there's a problem there. Until you're scaling up, you probably have a hard time raising money. Okay, but you need that money to scale up. We'll come back to that one. Okay, this is you'll see it when I click it, but failure to communicate your objectives and strategies to all employees, receptionists, on up. Everybody in the company should know this. I have never been involved with a company where that was true. a handful of people understand what the strategy is. The rest are trying to guess. We'll come back to that one. The next one, here's the big problem. The market's not ready for scale up. You've been misled. You have early adopters. You don't ever want to rely on early adopters. Because I'll put a curve up here when we talk about that. It's an indefinite period when the market changes from early adopters to a real market. Valley of death, various people say that. And the VCs, if they invest at that stage, they bet on that. Because they bet you're going to run out of money in that stage and they can come in, do a much better deal in the next round. We'll talk about that. Failure to staff with revenue producing and support people. And I'll put a graph up on that one too. Why are almost all employees of companies in the mode that we're talking about totally stressed out? They are totally stressed out, including the founders and management. They're all stressed out. And we'll talk about why. Okay, useless board of directors. 95% of companies have a useless board of directors. We'll talk about what I mean by that and why it helps to have a helpful board of directors. Okay? Disputes among the founders and shareholders. They're often not evident to the outside world, but they're going on. And that's a self-destruct mechanism right there. They've got to be resolved before you try to scale up and before you try to raise capital to scale up. Paranoia of the founders. Everyone's out to get them. Therefore, they don't want to communicate squat to anybody. Well, all entrepreneurs have paranoia. Why? Because it's real. There are many, many things out there trying to get to you, trying to get you. But you've got to get over that. There are some that have paranoia that goes way beyond what it should, and it prevents a number of these things when they are paranoid. But I always tell my class, it's real. People come out of the woodworks when they see that you're about to scale up, offering you, I can raise money in Saudi Arabia, and I can raise money in Colombia, and blah, 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 blah. And then you get deluged every single day from these people. Or suppliers. Just everybody comes to you trying to take advantage of you, and that's true. But you can't let that create the real paranoia that prevents you from doing things. So let's go back and talk about these from the top. Okay. Vague objectives lead to a vague strategy. Has to. Here's a vague objective. I know you can't read it. We will achieve revenues this year, $10 million. That's the objective. That doesn't cut it. That's not even close. F. And behind that, they're going to do a frontal assault on all major competitors, and they will fail. It should be using a pointed attack on competitors to focus their resources. Well, let's go to what we might be able to find. I gave a couple of examples. Let's look at some objectives that I think work. Achieve 2,000 inquiries per month for inbound marketing. You all know what inbound marketing means? It means that you make yourself known to the marketplace and potential customers contact you. And then you put the full court press on them. Because scattered advertising doesn't do it. Has no target to it. But if you can achieve inbound marketing, man, you've got a workable marketing strategy. Anyway, convert 30% of the inquiries to sales. Decide on the best feature set within 30 days. Have a staff of 20 programmers within 6 months. Test the market assumptions every 30 days to confirm the estimate. I'd be pleased if I saw a company come in with that and say, these are our objectives for I'll say for the first year. So, but that can lead to a strategy. And let me try that one. Okay. Sample strategy. We will focus on our XYZ product. Use inbound marketing by making XYZ product known through trade shows, social media testimonials, and differentiate XYZ with clear, useful features not offered by the competition. I'd be happy with that too. You'll note I don't have a single, let's buy some ads and put them on Google or Yahoo or something. You don't have a single one there. You certainly don't have, let's put it in trade advertising. It's just as a waste of money. Inbound marketing is the key to almost every company that's scaling up, because marketing, I refer to it, Walt, you're an engineer, it's an infinite sump for money. You can't spend enough, and if the market's not going to respond, you can't spend enough to make it respond. So anyway, fuzzy or vague objectives lead to a fuzzy or vague strategy, and your employees don't know what to do. They don't have a roadmap that's set for them. Well, how about the management team? So who would be the management team? Well, often it's the CFO or controller. Now, most companies of less than, say, $20 million in revenue, they might call somebody a CFO, but that person's really the controller, managing the accounting function, because there's no real strategic need for a CFO at that time. It's not like you're out raising capital every couple of weeks. It's not like you're borrowing a ton of money. What you really need is a great accounting function and a great person with numbers to help with projections. That's not CFO work. So, but that person's almost always missing. VP of marketing. Yeah, that person's almost always missing. And there's the biggest one, the chief operating officer, or a chief operating officer. It's inevitable that founders of companies that are managing these companies are never detail-oriented. Never, Walt, never. Walt's going like this. COOs are. And they are a terrific help to that person or persons, the chief operating officer. When I see somebody that's getting ready to ramp, let's say, and they've gone out and they found a pretty good person as COO, my hat's off to them. They have a chance. Of course, you want to fill in these other things if you can, but often you can't afford to do it. I know that, but investors don't understand that. But anyway, you've got to have that team. And the most important person on that team that you probably don't have is Chief Operating Officer. Well, you try to scale up with debt. There is no commercial lender on the earth that will fund your losses knowingly. Okay, knowingly. Why? Every lender, commercial lender now, wants to lend money that creates assets. Losses do not create assets. Nathan's been there, done that, and that doesn't happen. Plus, when you fund losses with debt, and the debt typically comes from non-traditional lenders who are probably vulture investors in disguise, you bet your company. And it's inevitable the losses will be greater than you predicted for a longer period of time. And you'll be in default under the debt in a year, or whatever the time frame is. Don't do that. I tell my class, by the way, now I'm going to put it to a hand vote. Enron got started 1 mile from here, across from Einstein's. It was Florida Gas. Everybody know that? I like to tell my classes that. They all go, whoa. And then they moved to Houston, and they went on an acquisition binge, and their officers were right here, living about half a mile from our school. But Enron went into Chapter 11 for accounting irregularities. How many of you agree with that? None? Ooh, I have to find out what you think it went under. Okay, Carolyn, why do you think Enron filed Chapter 11 on Monday morning? Any thoughts? What's the rumor?
Too much
Okay.
debt.
Too much debt? Well, that's almost true, so we'll come back to that.
So the lenders found out that they had a bunch of fake assets in those Raptor corporations.
Not quite. All the so-called fake assets were clearly identified in their footnotes. All the off-balance funding that they did, balance sheet funding, was identified in their footnotes. Why did no accounting or finance person, why wasn't at Enron, none was convicted, were convicted of accounting fraud? Not a single one. A couple went to jail because they did a plea deal, which they were sorry for. Because what they learned was the accusations about accounting fraud were false because they were in the footnotes. They had 70 pages of footnotes. Lenders knew that. Lenders knew they had these big power plants off the coast of Africa on barges that at the end of every quarter, they put it into a special purpose entity, move the debt off, move the asset off, and 2 days later, whoop, they put it back on. Well, it was in the footnotes. And everybody complains about it. No, that's not what happened. They made the stupidest mistake that any company can make, and this is what I'm warning you about. They borrowed short 30-day money to fund massive losses that were, in fact, being reported. Well, borrowing short in 30 days for a large company is commercial paper. You all know when you put your money in money markets, that's what you're putting it in. It's supposed to be almost risk-free. On a Friday afternoon, the investment bankers that handled the rollover of their commercial paper said, nobody's going to do it. We're not going to sell it. You have to tap your line of credit from the bank. Bank says, no way. Monday morning, they filed Chapter 11. Now, Friday night, by the way, what's his face, the chairman, whose name I can't remember. Ken Lay called the President of the United States Friday night to say, we need to have the government guarantee some loans for us because we can't roll over our debt on Monday. President turns over to Treasury Secretary, I can't remember who it was, said, kiss off. We're not doing it. So Monday morning. It wasn't accounting fraud that put them under. It was pure stupidity of borrowing short to save probably 2 interest rate points on the debt that they had. They had long-term debt also. So if that
the same
company,
thing that got Bear Stearns and Merrill
well,
Lynch
they
and
all
that?
are incredibly leveraged, but they were leveraged with short-term debt. Okay.
Same thing.
You never do that. You never have losses and have short-term debt. Well, that's true with any company, large or small. So the largest company at the time, and I think in the world, at least in that business, made that mistake. It's unbelievable. The so-called smartest people in the world. And they were trying to save on an interest rate. Anyway, point is, don't do that. Okay, don't fund losses with debt. So, now, you often hear about, well, your investors want to do convertible notes. Any of you ever heard that? Yeah, you'll hear that all the time. Don't do that, unless it's the last resort. Because a convertible note is debt. It comes due usually in 1 year. And it usually says, if you don't raise X dollars within 1 year, we have the right to foreclose on the note, or call the note, if you will. Or we can convert at a default valuation, which is probably 1/5 of the valuation you think ought to be on the company. The argument always is, well, we can postpone putting a valuation on the company until another round of investors come in. False. There's always a default valuation in that deal. And if you think your valuation is $1.5 million, the default valuation is probably going to be $500,000. All I'm saying is, the investors that do that love it from an investor standpoint because you have terrific leverage when you don't raise the $600,000 you have to raise within 12 months. They have you over, they could literally take over your company in very short order. They don't, but they do exercise that leverage and make a better deal for themselves. Now, I'm saying that, don't do that, and yet almost all angel groups do convertible notes. But anyway, I'm just saying, resist that. But in order to resist that, you have to have another source of capital because they're probably not going to back off that. Okay, let's go to start to scale without adequate capital. I've said this many times, that you can look at a financial model of every type of company, and there is a growth rate that company cannot exceed using retained earnings only, so-called bootstrap. You can look at the formula, how that happens. They can't, their accounts receivable are going to increase so fast. Inventory, if they have inventory, is going to increase so fast. Other things in terms of payables will increase so fast, and they work themselves right up and can't meet their obligations when due. By the way, that's the definition of insolvency. So companies need to raise capital to reliably scale up. It's a mistake to say, well, I can't raise capital until I'm halfway scaled up. Well, if that's the case, you're out of business and don't know. Business should be already have enough opportunity that's clear to potential investors that you can raise capital. If it's not, you better talk to somebody about scaling up. It's not going to work without capital, and should not ever be debt capital. So we've been talking for 2.5 years about raising capital from angels, because that's who typically provides the capital I'm talking about in this kind of stage of a business. You can't get private equity, large hedge funds and stuff to invest $200,000 in you. That's peanuts. That doesn't work. Angel investors is where that money comes from. Every time. And we do have angel groups. They're getting better. They're getting better at valuations, better, higher valuations for the companies. They're getting better at negotiating the deals they do. They're getting better in syndicating deals among themselves. It's been talked about for years. It's starting to happen. Nevertheless, it takes forever to get money out of an angel group, and they'll never put it all in. If you're going to raise $600,000, one angel group will work you over for about 4 months and say, okay, we'll invest $200,000. You find the other 400. Well, and we're not going to put the 200, of course, if you raise the 400, you just wasted 4 months of time. You got to be doing these things in parallel, because that's going to have to go in parallel. Well, we've been talking about that, and we've probably spent 30 hours talking about that subject right there. So I'm not going to go into it further, but my experience is you typically raise, if you're going after 600K, you go to individual angel investors and go to the angel group as to top it off with extra capital. It just takes forever to go through the angel groups. It's inherent. Well, you make a presentation. Okay, we like you. Come on back next month. Make another presentation. Yeah, well, we think we like you. Okay, so how about if you come back the third month? And by the way, now we're going to do our due diligence. That'll take 2 months. This just goes on and on and on and on. It's unbelievable. It's inherent, because they're all volunteers. They're all people that don't have to make an investment at all. So they put it through an unbelievable exercise. Okay, you think I'm opposed to that? Maybe. But once again, you have to do it if that's the only way you can raise money. Okay, how about failure to communicate? Wow. I had a really good client for 21 years, Philip Crosby Associates. Some of you may remember. Phil invented the term zero defects when he was at Lockheed Martin, it was Martin Company. He became vice president of quality worldwide for IT&T, and he wrote a book called Quality is Free. It became one of the business bestsellers. It continues to be a bestseller in business books, and it's like 30 years old. And what it said was quality starts at the top, not at the bottom. So he ran the Quality College here. You know where, not Fresh Market now, Trader Joe's? Is that, over there, they tore down that 5-story building that was there. That was the Quality College. And top management from all the big companies would come down. They had to be the first ones in before anybody else could go in the program. It was like a 4-day program. it basically said, when you went through it, you kept saying, well, oh, that's obvious. You ever experienced that? Well, apparently it wasn't obvious to you, or you wouldn't be here. But it started to set quality, and by the way, the first person who had to come to that program in any company, no matter how large, was CEO. Nobody else could come until the CEO went through the program. So we had Exxon, IBM, all these people staying in the Mount Vernon Inn. Right across the street. It was sort of humorous, but now I've lost, why am I telling you about Philip Crosby searches? Anyway, he had a meeting every Friday afternoon. We had a really nice auditorium. Every employee, except I think some, at least one or two of the funds, came to that meeting, and it was a free-for-all. They could ask any question of Phil or any other officer, and that person had to answer the question truthfully. And he always started out with like a 15-minute talk about what is our strategy, what are our objectives, every single time. It was a phenomenally successful company. We took it public. Phil got really tired of being a publicly held company really fast when you know, the analysts are all over him, all that stuff. So he decided, we're going to sell to a company on the London Stock Exchange, Proudfoot, a big consulting, publicly held consulting firm in London for, I want to say, $87 million. Now the company is publicly held, so most of that went to the public, although he came up with a fair chunk. Part of the deal was happens that he wasn't allowed back in the offices. They set him up with a separate office over here, I don't know, over by the post office. And that's where he could come, and he could come for management meetings once a month. That was it. Of course, he was incensed. They took that company from 150 employees who were back in the Full Sail building on a university. That first big blue building was where Philip Crosby was. They took it from 150 employees when they bought it to 1 employee in 4 years. They killed the company. Phil bought it back for $10. Now, there was an interesting problem though. Before he bought it back, they had granted an exclusive license to a company in Boston for the whole United States. So the United States was carved out, so we had to pay them a lot of money. But we didn't pay Proudfoot a lot of money. But the point was, those meetings were wonderful. He had the courage to do that. Because often there were some really sticky questions that were asked. I would go to those. I was there to say, Phil, no, don't say that. Well, he wouldn't listen to me anyway. But it was a phenomenally successful company for lots of reasons, but that was one of them. Yeah.
Were the meetings effective?
In what way?
Well, did they accomplish what he wanted it to accomplish?
Yes.
And
every employee in there thought everything was transparent.
okay. And the employees were on board with what he was trying to do.
Yeah. We used to talk about this among the lawyers downtown. He had every employee benefit that was imaginable. He had daycare, free daycare in the building where they worked, free daycare. He had the best 401k at the time. He had an ESOP too. We formed an ESOP, so the employees all ended up with a piece of the company through the ESOP. I could go on and on and on. It was everything. It was unbelievable. And all the executives were allowed to take their spouses on any business trip outside of 100 miles. Company paid. They had 2 jets, which I thought was ridiculous because it cost like $50,000 a month to maintain each, by the way, to maintain those damn jets. And all the executives flew all over the country with it. It was unbelievable in terms of the benefits that people had throughout the company. So the answer was yes. Nobody left that company. They had a waiting list of people that wanted to be employed by that company. Now, it wasn't just because of this communication, but Phil was saying quality is primarily achieved through communication. Anyway, it was an awfully good lesson. So, how do you do that? Well, I've had other companies do the sort of things, but they wouldn't answer difficult questions. So that always, the moment that you say, I'm not going to answer that, transparency just went out the window. So it takes courage to do that in front of employees. Anyway, whenever every employee can tell you what the objectives are, what the strategy is, that company's on its way to success. By the way, we in business school, we always say, what's your mission statement? Okay? Well, that's usually God and country. And they'll start out with, we're going to benefit society by doing the following things. And I say, F. Your business strategy. Now, these are publicly out, or any company, but with investors. Your mission statement must be, we will increase shareholder value by doing the following things. If they don't say that, they're wrong. Now, do you say that to the public? No. The internal mission statement is what I just said. The external might be, we're going to benefit the world by doing the following things. That's useless, that statement to the public. But it's sort of a symptom of how people don't let the employees know what the real strategy is. And if you have a mission statement that says increase shareholder value by blah, 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 they get the point. It's to increase value for the shareholders. Market's not ready. Okay, it's time for some charts here. Okay, everybody got the message? Don't spill your coffee, right? Okay. Dollars in revenue. Time. Almost everything in the world behaves in an S-curve, right? And, okay. When a company is in this mode and they hit this point, they think they're at this point. They think it's going to go like that. It never does. It really levels off until the early adopters turn the market into a real market. Then, if it's going to happen, that inflection point happens. Okay, you better have enough capital to take you through that. Because typically you're going to have losses during that period. Because you tried to scale up too soon. You lay off people. I mean, it's a disaster when you do this. And yet, everybody does it. You're just totally misled. It might not be early adoption, it might be other things, but you're misled. All investors want to invest right there. VCs, of course, want to invest there, but they'll invest back in here because they know the company's going to run out of company, and then they'll invest here, run out of cash, because they will get a hell of a better deal on that next round than they did on that first round. They know it. It's going to happen. And help me. There are a bit different names, Valley of Death and whatever the other names are. That's it. And of course, you always have to show that ultimately markets that will offer opportunities. And what you always try to say, oh, we have other products that are on. Go like that. Business plans are basically worthless for investors. They're good for internal use, but they're worthless for investors because nobody believes anything you say. Because I'll bet you your business plan always says that. Always. And the answer is, well, if I don't predict that, I can't raise capital. Well, knowledgeable investors know that's not going to happen. So basically it backfires. Well, that's ridiculous. You're not going to achieve those numbers. The market, very few companies really understand the real opportunities or traps that are in the market they're trying to serve. It's not a marketing research issue. It's the lean startup philosophy. Get out, do it, get a product that you think is working, get it out. CEO, get out there 2 days a week yourself, find out. You'll find that out. You'll find out whether the buyers are really the type of buyers that make up a large market. And when you find out, no, they're specialty buyers, stand by, because you're going to experience that. What can you do about that? No company, large or small, but can stimulate a market or cause a market. Outside forces cause the market. You can't spend enough money on advertising to create a market. You got to wait until, and we always say, wait till the big guys do it. That'll demonstrate there's a market, and you come in with a specialty area, pinpoint and kill them in areas that they're not paying attention to. But I go back to my saying, markets are created by outside forces beyond anybody's control. No point in trying to think you're going to, well, when a company comes to me and says, oh, it's an education sale. How many did, it takes 3 visits to a customer, and they get it. F, again, okay. The message is, they don't really have a market. A market is this test, this is a test. Customers say, I like your product, I'm considering other products, whether or not to buy that or yours. Why? That's demand. Now, but on the other hand, when Walt walks in and says, George, you really need this product. George said, yeah, I think I need it. I think I need it. That's need, okay? That's not demand. What converts that need feeling to demand is outside forces. So I always ask my students, by the way, they're all with experience. I teach in the evening and Saturday program, so they at least have some experience. What are the outside forces that are going to cause this? And they can't name them. It's not going to happen then. Or put it differently, get in front of a wave. The wave will take care of you. You sure as hell don't want to be behind it. So that's a crucial mistake that even companies that are self-sustaining don't understand that they may already have as much of the market they're going to get. Because the market they think is there is not there. Another way to do it again. CEO gets out 2 days a week in front of customers. Every successful company I've worked with, that's what CEOs did. They had to have direct communication from decision makers on the buying end. What is causing that company to buy our service or our product? And it's always things that you don't actually realize that are happening. So, biggie. By the way, I'm not offering solutions to these things. Okay? I'm giving you the problems and not necessarily the solutions. Okay. Here's another chart. Failure to staff revenue producing and support personnel for the scaling up. Okay? Can everybody see this? It's sort of weak. Let me turn the lights on for a second. Okay. This is revenue. This is time. I'm sorry. This curve is revenue. And this curve, this one is number of employees, not time. Number of employees. Okay, so if you're going to scale up and have double the revenues you had this year, next year, you seriously have to have the people to cause that to happen. Everybody knows that, right? Every company does this. This is the revenue line they're on. When they say that, they're staffed right there. And they don't hire any more people, and they stress the hell out of the people until it's unbearable. Then they hire more people, and they catch up, stress out the people again. It's a never-ending cycle. Well, what does stressed out people do? They don't work well. They don't work smartly. they're angry. Customers get get that feeling. It's self-destruct mode. What should happen here? They should hardly hear. What have I done? I have created capacity for more business by doing that. But you have to lead it. You can't lag it. Now, you have to have the courage to do that, and you have to have the resources to do that. But if you, and by the way, probably 90% of all companies do the first one. They stress their people out, just make them work harder. And then they finally realize that's not working, I need to hire some more people. Well,
Interesting you talked about that in light of that. Was it GT, the company that was making the sapphire for GT or GP? that makes the
something
sapphire?
like that, yeah.
Okay, because they had just the opposite problem. They overstaffed,
Yeah, they really did.
and they had people.
Well, they were relying on Apple without a contract. Well, they did have a contract, but not for what they staffed up for. They were going to make screens for their PCs and the iPads too, which Apple decided not to do. But yeah, they did. It was a total mistake.
They go to a different. They went to a different material.
Pardon me? Yeah, they did. Yeah, we have crystal makers. We have the largest user of electricity in Seminole County. Sits up just south of Sanford that makes crystals for CT scans. You know, CT scans are not MRIs, and they have a big ring of these crystals that detect, you get shot with electrons, and it comes back with an image. They make those crystals probably for 3/4 of all CT scans in the world. And these crystals are made in these furnaces. Each furnace is about that round, about that tall, and you start the crystal. It's at 3,000 degrees F in those. It's unbelievable. You know that big bowl that calls it BOULE is what you call it, and then they slice and dice the crystals. You wouldn't know it sitting up there. It's unbelievable.
What's the name of the company?
You would ask me that.
I had to ask, you know.
Yeah, I can't remember. I teamed with one of my litigators, and we won a lawsuit against.
It's interesting you remember that term though, BOULE.
Well, I remember, I watched them make those damn things. It's unbelievable. Well, they must have 50 of these furnaces up there. Yes,
You're talking about crystal photonics, aren't you?
yes, it is. Thank you. Yes, it is.
Crystal photonics.
Crystal photonics.
Thank you.
There's a funny aspect to that, but anyway, they operated without contracts and they got burned. You know, trying to supply to GE and those kinds of people on purchase orders that are monthly, purchase orders. That's ready for a disaster when you're in that kind of really high capital intensive business. Anyway, you never know what's around here. You have the strangest damn things because they're not involved with the community. You know, their market, they don't sell things. Anyway, how many people have the courage to do that? Well, you better damn well have courage. This is the revenue curve. But if you do know that and you do this, you have open capacity to do it. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to actually have open people, not exactly sitting around, but they're not real busy just waiting for the next order so they can pounce on it? That'd be such a wonderful experience, wouldn't it? Carolyn's shaking her head. It would be a wonderful experience, but you don't want to pay them, right?
As long as they're all on commission.
There you go.
I would be stressed out.
Well, you said it right. Nobody wants to really take the risk of paying them. If you make it a variable cost, of course you'll do that, right? If it's all variable, meaning commission, hey. But most things like this are not totally 100% commission, but if you can do that, that's fantastic. Okay, useless board of directors. Companies we're talking about here are typically still controlled by the founders. Let's assume that. Okay. Or a founder. It takes a hell of a lot of courage to have qualified people sit on the board of directors that the founder appoints or elects. Now, because if you really qualified people, they will cause attention. Attention is, on the one hand, I want to be supportive of you. On the other hand, Walt, you're the founder, I'm going to challenge you on all your objectives and strategy every month. And I'm going to make you convince me again that you're on the right path. How many boards of directors do that? Very few. They're deluged with minutia to approve and discuss, should we buy the furniture over there, but no, they don't do that, and they should. I've had only 2 companies that ever did that. I tell all of my clients all the time, you gotta have dynamite board, you got to devote 50% of every board meeting to strategy discussion, and you gotta prepare them, send stuff out ahead of time. 2 companies out of at least more than 100 actually did it for a long term. They were spectacularly successful. That wasn't necessarily the reason, but the CEO, the founder, actually worked hard to be in front of the board of directors. Most founders believe their board of directors works for them. There's a need for an attitude adjustment. They work for the board of directors. Now, even if the founder has the right to elect all the directors, legally they still, he or she works for the board. Founders have to accept that board members are not stupid. I put on a play in the business ethics class where I have a mock board meeting of a privately held company where the president handpicks all the directors and they get into accounting trouble. I play the CFO, by the way, and I allow the board to commit accounting fraud. Okay, and then we see what happens. But every director, one's a personal friend, the other one's a former CPA, used to do their books. Another is one of them is a politician for the state with the state senate, and another I can't remember the others. You know, they're all hopeless, and they put them on the board so that they don't challenge them whatsoever. A really bad mistake. You know, on the other hand, I represent a lot of founders, and I say this: to never go into a board meeting without knowing the outcome before you go in, if there's going to be a vote on things. You know,
Well, does the CEO generally pick the board of directors with the approval of the founders, or is it generally a joint decision right from the top?
well, if it's not a publicly held, let's take a privately held company, make that assumption. Because what we are talking about here, frankly, are privately held companies. These companies we're talking about are not big enough to be publicly held. So founders pick the board. CEO may have some influence in suggesting people, but founders typically own enough of the company, more than 50%, that they can elect the whole board. So I guess I have to tell you a quick war story here.
So I hear a lot of people talk about the importance of a board, but I don't hear a lot about, obviously there's advisory boards and governance boards, but incentivizing the board. How is the board incentivized? Are they given points in the company? Are they doing it just out of the goodness of their heart? I mean, how does that work?
There's a rule of thumb: you give a stock option for 1% of the company each, so long as they're on the board for at least 3 years. The problem in a privately held company, stock options are worthless until the company is sold or it goes public. And that's a big, big problem for all stock incentive for executives in privately held companies. How do you end up with a piece that you don't get killed from a tax standpoint, but has value someday? That's a very big problem. And we're not going to talk about that today, but that's the rule of thumb, Josh. Give them an option for 1% of the company. It'll get diluted as you raise capital, and you have the vesting over 3 years, so long as they serve on the board. Now, most people that serve on boards that get that, and there are often a minor cash fee, like $2,000 per day. Depends on the health of the company, of course. Most people that serve on boards of directors are not doing it for the options, and they're not doing it for the $2,000 per day. They love the status. And often they're, of course, personal friends, often with the founder, so that's a different deal. But they love the status. And there's a Harvard professor I was on the board with, Howard Stevenson, who has written books on this, but he says, this is an expression I love to use with professors. if a person is serving on the board of a publicly held company and they aren't a big stockholder, they've passed the stupidity test. In other words, he says nobody should be sitting on publicly held boards except for very large shareholders, because the risk far outweighs any compensation you possibly be getting. Like in Enron, of course, when they went bankrupt, they failed to pay their D&O insurance premiums, and then suddenly there was no D&O insurance. All the directors came up with, the formula was they had to come up with a third of their net worth. That was a settlement for the directors at Enron. And you had some seriously wealthy people on that board. But,
Quickly less wealthy.
pardon me?
Quickly less wealthy.
Well, it's still not painful. It's not really painful for somebody that has $10 million net worth. They have to come up with $3 million. $7 million is still okay. Harry's going to have that. Harry's got all this secret stuff up here because he worked for the CIA or NSA. Which one?
CIA.
CIA. See, he knows everything there is to know about North Korea.
Not quite.
Well, it takes a lot of courage once again for a privately owned company to bring in some qualified people on the board. If the founder's really worried that the board's going to take control, well, that's BS. The founder can remove the people in a heartbeat. Now, so I have to tell you a funny story. I was doing a deal with a company in Titusville. I think it was with a small venture capital firm that was going to put in, I don't know, $600,000 or $700,000. And the company had two directors, the founder and his old friend who is a lawyer now, former FBI, now private, whatever. And he's on the board. And oh, by the way, he would come to board meetings in this black suit, and he would, every time he'd go, he had a pearl handle 45. And the reason he did, he put a lot of criminals in prison, so anyway, it was character. Well, we were getting ready to close, and we just needed a board resolution to do this, and he refused. So I took a piece of paper out, and I said, and I put it the founder, I hereby remove such and such, effective immediately from the board of directors. And I said, okay, thank you, George, but you're off the board. Okay, founder signed the paper and signed. Okay, I hereby elect George to the board of directors. You can do that. When you have a controlling number of shares in a company, you can do a consent in writing. That's what that just did. He was pissed, of course, that we did that. But nothing he could do. Anyway, we did the deal, and ultimately we got rid of this guy because it was really unpleasant. Well, the VCs came in and saw that damn 45 too. This guy's gotta go. Anyway, people can do that. So founders can remove directors who don't do things their way. Well, the founder has to have the courage to realize, hey, they may be right. Is there a hand coming up? Sorry. That'll teach you to scratch your head.
I was going to say that, you know, in the case of U-Haul, he did the same thing that Sam Walton did. You know, he portioned the stock out to his kids, and then they threw him out.
Yeah, I know. What he didn't do is he should have made it. He should have had their voting rights.
Exactly.
He should have transferred the stock but kept the voting rights, which
Just
you
like Ford
could do.
Foundation.
Yeah, which you could do. Well, Ford Foundation, interesting enough, owns less than 0.5% of Ford, but they own a special class of stock that allows them to elect the majority of the board of directors.
Really? I didn't know that.
Even today.
Wow.
Well, why do you think there's a chairman of the board always with the last name Ford? It's not likely he's the most qualified person to be in that position,
Is that right?
but they seem to work out, right? Yeah, you can
Yeah,
do
his
that.
character. He's
So,
he's
boards of directors can play a really big role in a company by challenging the founders, CEO of the objectives and strategy. Boards are part-timers. So you always have to keep that in mind. They show up, they know a little bit about the company for that day, and then they're gone. But they play the role because they can prevent the company from doing stupid things. But you really want them to be on top of it to say, what are the opportunities? What are the threats? What's your strategy? What are your objectives? And it doesn't matter, they don't know much about the company, but they sure as hell can figure out whether they're crystal clear objectives are a really well-defined strategy. Anybody can do that that has some experience at being a board member. And they can also say, and the other thing about a board, there's an invisible hand that a qualified board puts over a company. Because typically all the heads of different functions come in and make a presentation for that day, 15, 20 minutes. Well, they're scared to death of coming into that board and looking stupid. So it really prevents them from doing dumb things before they even get to the board. So there's this invisible hand, but that invisible hand only works if there's a board of directors willing to say, no, Walt, we don't agree with you, you shouldn't be doing, in other words, they have to be willing to disagree, or else there's no invisible hand. Well, it's, I can't remember what I have.
Bill, can you not only, you can have problems with it. Wasn't there a lot of problems with Pritzker's?
Yes, there were, but I don't know the details. Well, the Pritzker's indirectly the developers of Baldwin Park. City of Orlando sold that property to them. Founders need an attitude adjustment to be able to do this. And attitude adjustments only come about voluntarily. You can't force somebody to adjust their attitude. It's got to come about from within. But once again, it takes courage. It takes courage to have qualified people. And then the challenge is to find people who are legal. But by the way, boards of advisors are often chosen because the people are smart enough on that board of advisors not to have the liability associated with being on the board. That's true. But almost by definition, board of advisors have even a less connection to the company than directors. And frankly, they're sort of worthless. Except on paper, they really look good. If you have a scientific board of advisors, that's a different deal. But otherwise, boards of advisors don't really function very well. But sometimes that's a substitute for the board of directors itself. Dennis is going to disagree with me.
No, I was just going to say the code word from investors is the attitude adjustment is the founder coachable.
Thank you, that's right, that's a good word. We all know that.
And there are many founders that are not,
Yeah.
and those that are not probably are not going to raise any capital.
Is the founder coachable? Good point. Which leads to, is the company investable? It's not investable if the CEO, controlling person, is not coachable. There's a direct link to that. And when I say investable, I mean for getting on a track for raising millions of dollars. Raise 500 now, $1.5 million in 6 months, $4 million the next. That's a company that's on a path that's going to end up being quite an interesting company. And my personal mission here at Rollins is to help companies become investable. I'm not here to help startups. Everybody else is, but I'm not. But I have a little thing in there, I should bring it out. You remember that thing of little pins and you put your hand up, there's your hand. Okay. I have one of those in my office. I saw it at Birdine's when Birdine's was still there. And there's one pin I have sticking up. Probably 1,000 of these pins there. And I always ask, is there a pin sticking up? And everybody goes, I don't know. And there is, there's one. I said, that's the company that's investable. And by the way, I can't find that company, they have to find me. It's the inbound marketing part. I did a lot of things in startup companies, and of course I had a very successful law practice by doing that. But boy, it was a pain to never get paid by 2/3 of them. But the ones that do pay, the ones that do pay are really, really good clients. So, coachable, investable, absolutely interrelated. Well, the attitude adjustment. We laugh about this. We all know the Vendello people, of course, and they have these interesting presentations right in this room, usually. What monthly? I don't know. From potential companies who want to raise money from Vendello. And Alan and Richard and I also, you can sort of see where that company is investable in about 5 minutes. It doesn't take long. And it's all because the attitude of of that founder is the biggest thing that comes through right away. We laugh about that. It's sort of a waste of time. You know, in the business plan, you look at about the executive summary, and then you go back, look at the people, and you trash the financials. That's it for a business plan and for investors, because they know that the financials are never going to come true. But they want to see that the team, a team, or a semblance of a team is there, and they want to know that somebody can really summarize what they're doing and what the opportunity is in 2 or 3 pages. It's the old rule, by the way, of 12 slides. That rule had prevailed in venture capital country in Silicon Valley for years. Don't give me a presentation that's more than 12 slides. Well, it morphed into, don't give me a business plan, give me a business model. The 12-slide challenge was really a business model. Summarize your business and what the opportunity is in succinct terms. Don't give me details. And that's, now we teach business models instead of business plans, which are very interesting. And my experience has been when our students are in teams, when they pick a company to start and they do a business model, probably half of them will halfway through the process say, this is not working. We have to do something else. And they morph or they change. When you're in a business plan mode in MBA program, once you pick your business and start down that path, you don't dare change. You're spending 90% of your time writing and 10% of your time thinking. When you do a business model, you're spending 80% of your time thinking and 20% preparing the slides. And that's a good thing for everybody to think about. But the old code word was 12 slides. That is the business model. Well, disputes among founders and shareholders. There almost always are underlying potential disputes, if not outright evident disputes. No investor in their right mind wants to invest in a company where somebody's suing the company because they promised them options and they haven't come through, or there's a disgruntled shareholder that wants 30% of the company, or those kinds of things. Or the 2 founders, let's say there are 3 founders and 2 of them want to get rid of the third. Well, until they cure those things, no investment, no knowledgeable person to invest. So, of course, we all say, well, you got to head those off, and you want to, but they're often unavoidable. And of course, when you deal with people, sooner or later, there's going to be somebody who's going to be a pain. So, all I'm saying is, you got to get rid of these things. Lawsuits don't usually get rid of things. And so often, well, I don't want to settle with that person. That person's a jerk. Blah 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 blah. And I said, okay. Well, we'll wait until you have a result, and then you can raise money. So pay some money now, and you can raise some money. Anyway, bad news when that happens. Paranoia of founders. It is justified. I know that from experience. It's justified. People are out to take advantage of that company. And people have to learn how to fend them off and not believe them. But they're almost always exaggerated. When it gets to a point where it's unhealthy, that company's not going to raise money. Because a paranoid person caused by things, not mental disorder and such, a paranoid person is going to be very close. Is not going to want to discuss things. It's absolutely the antithesis of communicating with all of your employees, as an example. They will not do that. So it's a symptom when they don't do that. It's a symptom in part of an unwillingness to do that because they're paranoid. Because they think the employees are going to go out and start a competing company even though they have a non-compete. Those kinds of things. So how does a founder avoid the paranoia? They have to recognize it's coming, and they have to just get over it. It's part of the coachable part, that is to get over it. Because they have to do these other things, and paranoia interferes with so much. It'll absolutely interfere with raising capital. So, and by the way, the symptom of a paranoid entrepreneur is, Nathan, are you paranoid? He says, no. Well, that's it, that's the symptom, that's the symptom. The answer no is the symptom. Well, I want you to ask me questions about any of these subjects, because we have 20 minutes here, and it's a dialogue, right? And the only dialogue that tends to occur between me and Dennis, but I want to see if you all want to bring up subjects related to any of these. So, by the way, I could have kept on going, but I promised that only 10 to Dennis. My book, which I'm not promoting, but my book has 18 mistakes in it. Okay, so I picked 10 of them. Okay, Walt, what's on your mind? What are what thing up here do you think, have you experienced with others, experienced by observation with others, that really is damaging? Has everybody seen Walt with his hat on, by the way? He is the true Indiana Jones. He goes on these archaeological digs all the time.
You want me to tell a story?
Yeah.
This is a pure fabrication, by the way, but I get a lot of compliments on this hat, by the way, and let me tell you why I wear this hat. In April 27th of next year, I'll be 9 years out from a stem cell transplant for leukemia. So I'm extremely fortunate to be here. The only visible problem I have is, you may notice when I walk, I wear an orthotic device because I have severe neuropathy in my lower legs. Didn't keep me from taking ballroom dancing lessons, though, by God. That's where the ladies are. I wear this because I'm hypersensitive to the sun. It's one of the side effects of a stem cell transplant, which is a bummer because I used to sail and dive and ride my bike, and that's how I got my exercise.
You elected to live, that's the point.
I'm alive because I did the things I'm supposed to do. But anyway, people will comment about the hat, and I will just say it doesn't look very good. It's on a rack. It looks good because it's on me. And I proceed to tell them that we went down to the Amazon, and we found a tribe of Amazonian Italians.
Italians?
Pardon?
Did you say Italians?
Italian Amazonians, yeah. Wonderful group of people. And they go out in the forest and they hand-pick everything and they make a wonderful, wonderful lasagna.
Giant tomatoes. Okay.
It must be the way I tell it in the timing because they look and say, really? And I'll tell them I'm getting a new hat because I'm going someplace else for another adventure. So that's the story of the hat. It was like,
Okay, well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay because all of these things I'm going to transmit to somebody.
I'll give you the link to this, that's up in the cloud now.
Because I
I'll
know
give it to Dennis so we can get it out.
an up-and-coming kind of company right now that absolutely needs all of this. This is a group of 4 Georgia Tech students. And I talked with the young lady. She graduated in biomedical engineering in May from Georgia Tech. But this time last year, she said, we have a class project and we have something patentable. And they didn't say anything to her. I just said, I don't think so, not in one semester. But in fact, they have come up with something patentable. They've already gotten some money. They won an award at Georgia Tech. It's incredibly simple. Basically, when you do an ultrasound, they put that gel on you. Well, these guys have eliminated the gel. And it's quite interesting. And they're working through the various technical problems of what they have. But as I talked to the young lady, that like she's looking for money. She said, well, you need money for this and money for that. And listen to Bill, you don't go out and get it in chunks, you get it in one big piece. And such. But they're working through all of these problems. Fortunately, their team of 5 kids really work well together. But as you're pointing these things out, I can see how they could have that. And they've already got a potential large order from a large OBGYN company. And a doctor that's interested in this thing. It's going to be interesting.
Okay, Dennis, you hear that? You better invite him over. Make it good. I refer to all these things as hoops. And I say, smaller companies have to go through a lot of hoops imposed by our economy and our society. to get up to where they can raise a lot of money. And when I say I work with companies to become investable, they have to have gone through the hoops. They're not going to get to me. In fact, I used to have the best gatekeeper in the history of gatekeepers when I was a lawyer. There was no possibility anybody was going to talk to me on the phone until they sent the business plan. I looked at it, it was okay, and other tests. But she was the former secretary of the president of American Express. Nobody got to me unless they sort of went through the hoops. But they're hoops, and people like me, I rely on those hoops existing. Because if I get through them, I can work with them. Dennis can too. All of us that do what I do like that.
I'd like to ask you if, there has been any research done on the profile of a business that could limit their growth and self-finance. It seems to me that, there's so much time and energy spent in raising money that if that same time and energy was spent in growing the business and funding it internally. Now, I realize that there are some capital-intensive businesses where that doesn't work. Real estate.
Service businesses
Real estate,
don't
it doesn't.
require a lot of capital, as an example.
Pardon?
Service businesses, as an example, don't require a lot of capital.
Exactly. And they, that kind of a pure service business.
The answer is, to your question though, is yes. The Franklin Foundation, which is a very large foundation devoted to second stage entrepreneurs, which, looking around the room, I think most of you are, has wonderful resources, all free. And by the way, most companies can't make it through this, and they self-fund through retained earnings, in effect. And that's okay. Because you're absolutely correct. When a company starts down the path to raise meaningful capital, the CEO founder is going to spend 50% of his or her time forever from that point forward, raising capital, taking care of investors, getting ready for the next round of investment. And they better be prepared for that to happen. And so often companies go downhill during that period.
Right, you're taking somebody out of the equation. That's
Yeah, because they don't, people haven't gone through it, don't believe that's going to happen to them. Once they've gone through it, then they say, I'll never do that again.
Right.
But they admit, I've spent 50% or more of my time for 8 weeks, 3 months, 4 months doing that. Matt?
I advise a second stage company. That's kind of what you're talking about. The two founders, brothers, in lieu of trying to use debt financing or go out and raise money, have done it themselves. And it's a service industry, so like you said, they didn't necessarily need that. But what could have took maybe 5 or 10 years by going out and finding other people took 20. And the most difficulty that we have with them is they don't have that external advisement from investors or fundraising sources telling them this is how you get to the next level. And it's usually an uphill battle to get them to shift their paradigm and understand, okay, you plateaued a little bit. Maybe it's time to bring in fresh blood. Or
Yeah, Matt, you're giving the symptoms of somebody who may want to raise capital, but they won't raise capital.
because they see the upside.
Yeah, but first of all, they don't like to be told, well, you're not going to raise capital, you shouldn't spend your time and money on it. Who wants to be told that? Okay, nobody wants to admit that, because they don't know, they don't have experience, but you're describing the exact kind of company. Now, that company, though, like you said, probably has a it's probably very profitable, okay? And that's okay. In fact, most people can't stand the thought of having investors. I can't stand the thought of several investors owning 40% of your company. And it's understandable. By the way, you can run a curve up to say, you can watch if you sell 40% of your company and there's 40% that you just sold. And you can run these numbers and see, and then you run another curve on self-funding. It's going to be slower, but are you better off in 5 years? It's surprising what that curve might show. It may show, don't raise the capital. Because by the time you get diluted down, even though it's a bigger company. Your worth in that company may not be greater. And you better damn well run that curve.
What's the opposition to the investors?
Well, investors want to know that there is the potential there, as you say there is. That's the first thing. Second, they want to know that these people can take it there. Can they execute what the plan is? That's the biggest one. Yes,
I'd say number 3 is investors want to cash out at some point.
yes, they do, and that's the difficult.
And that may be diametrically opposed to the wishes of the founder.
It is. All founders will tend to agree in principle, we'll sell a company in 5 years. They never want to sell a company in 5 years when they get there. Now, they will if they're in financial difficulty. So there's no doubt that that's true. That's a very big problem because we used to be able to take companies public. I've told these stories back in the 90s. If you had $1 million in net after-tax earnings, you could have a public offering for probably $20 million and sell 30% of your company. Well, that was out. What the investors could get out over time. They couldn't get out right then, but they could get out over time. So we didn't have the problem of you have to sell your company. Now you do. There's no possibility small companies go public, legitimately. So the only solution is to sell your company. Well, no founder really wants to sell their company, but they have to say that in their plan because investors want that. Now, if you're with experienced venture, with angel groups, use the same agreements that venture capitalists use, by the way. And they put in these provisions that in 5 years, if you haven't been sold, you have to buy back our stock under a formula. That's always it. Nobody can buy back your stock because they can't possibly have the cash to buy the stock at that number. What that does is it puts a wall up, says you better damn well sell your company before that comes true. Every time. And so it's a way of saying, I hereby promise to sell a company. That promise is probably unenforceable. But I hereby promise to buy your stock on this formula basis at the end of 5 years if you demand it. That's enforceable. And I can assure you that's going to drive most companies to get sold. So it's a problem. Now, on the other hand, if you're doing really well at the end of 5 years, most investors don't want to get out. That's good. They want to see it because it's probably on a really neat curve, and you're probably increasing value by 30% every year. That's a good deal. Now, if you're the living dead, because you've flattened out and there's no opportunity to go any further, and you have investors that have that clause, you're going to sell your company at some point, and it's not going to be pretty because you won't have a growth curve that you're trying to sell your company off of. But look, in most cases, you can't get to where you want to get without investors. You have to just understand what it's going to be like to have investors. They bring money to the table. They never bring expertise. They always say they do. Don't put any value on that. I see a latecomer. You have to be prepared to do what it takes to have capital. And you'll have happy investors, unhappy investors. And if they're unhappy and they own 3% of your company, well, they just stay unhappy. You know, if they own 45% of your company, you've got a problem. If you have unhappy investors, even though they can't do anything with the 45%. So everybody has to get over it. And you know, almost every really successful entrepreneur says, and you've heard this before, if I knew what I was headed into, I'd never do it again. You ever hear that? It's universal. But people do it because you have an opportunity to have a much bigger company. Here.
You reminded me of some things that I learned back between like 83 and 88.
Wait a minute, it's classified probably.
No.
Okay.
Which I fell into. I did not have any business training. Between 83 and 88, the company I built at that point went from about $70,000 in sales to $950,000 in sales to $3 million in sales, and then leveled off at about $2.5 million for a number of years. With profits concomitant with, in fact, increasing in percentage.
Yeah.
Was that something I could have pushed?
Is that something what?
I could have pushed further with the right type of
You would
management?
not have been able to raise capital with that model. If in fact, looking back at, that's what was projected, you would not. And the growth rate and the size of the company is not big enough for investors to want to invest.
Okay.
Now, you say, oh, what do investors, do they want 12% return on their capital, they want 30%. That's the wrong way of approaching it. All investors want to know, you're going to increase the value of the company and increase the value of their investment. Sorry, it's hard on something here. Anyway, that's what they want. They don't want cash coming back to them in terms of dividends or stuff like that. That's foolish. But they do want to know that if they own 30% of the company and the company doesn't have to raise any more capital and you sell $15 million, they get $5 million. And they've invested, say, $500,000. That would be an attractive investment in 5 years, right? Maybe 1 out of 10 will do that. That raises capital for that. Everyone will say they're going to do it. Everyone, investors believe will do it, but 1 out of 10 will do it. Okay. Susan, is it Suzanne?
Suzanne,
Suzanne,
yes.
yeah.
I'm sitting here today as an investment banker.
Okay, she's got the money, folks.
I went from Winter Park to Wall Street, so it's always fun to come back to home here. And what I'm seeing is not finding true valuation, not finding true financial projections.
Okay, Suzanne, you've used an interesting term, true. How in the world do you get a true valuation on a company that say, let's say it's a company that had losses since its inception. It's an app factory, and its revenues are now $10 million, but it's losing money at the rate of $500,000 a year, and it's not looking for capital. How do you value that? How do you come up with true value? See, there are no metrics. That is an interesting problem.
Well, that's why I love the company that you created, because I see that as a huge value of making it investable.
And it has to be investment.
So my question to you is, and here's my challenge that I always put in front of my potential clients is, don't start off with that first tranche of investment. You know, I always suggest 3 tranches out, because then here you are with business continuity. What, do you agree with that? And what years do you put on it? 3 years out, 5 years out? You know, most investors are coming to me saying, I need this for the next 18 months. It's like, okay.
Investors?
Sorry, clients coming to me looking for investors.
Yeah, I was going to say, investors who want some kind of return in 18 months shouldn't be in the business. They shouldn't do that.
And so there
Okay,
you
the
are.
answer is, companies come to me and say, I want to raise $10 million. And I have a need for that for over the next 3 years. And I say, you're not going to raise $10 million. Try to raise $1.5 million. And achieve some milestones in the next 6 months, a year, raise another $1.5 million. Because the dilution will be less every time, assuming you're on a growth curve, okay? The problem is you're headed towards a cliff. You're running out of cash, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to raise another $1.5 million in, I'll pick March, by the end of March, okay? And you're clicking off the days when you're going to be out of cash, okay? Your negotiating power is diminishing by the day as you're approaching the drop dead date. That is the risk. And I had a interesting venture capitalist here that lived here for many years, and he always called that risk squared for the initial investor. The risk is not only the risk of the success of the business, but the risk that that company's not going to raise money when it needs to raise money.
Similar to your example here with the
Yes, it's very similar,
employees.
very similar. What that says is raise more than you need, but the market won't let you do that. Investors won't overinvest. Hey folks, she can raise money, that's it. Suzanne, you got a whole bunch of clients, or you need to get business?
My other question is, so the other challenge I see is the investor vehicle. I'm seeing the convertible notes. And
Okay.
exactly.
Investors love convertible notes. Young companies should never have a convertible note. So there's a, exact opposite view. Young companies will take issue convertible notes if they have no choice. They do that.
There's too much manipulation in it.
Well, there is a ability of manipulation. It's not the manipulation so much, it's a gun to the head. They almost always have. In 1 year, you will raise probably 10 times the capital I put in, or and it will trigger automatic conversion. And if you don't, I can call the note, or I can convert it at a really low valuation. And that's a big gun to the head. Young companies should never have a gun to their head voluntarily. So the answer is yeah, from an investor side, absolutely. It gives the investor the best leverage they can get. Right.
What do you see as the best investor vehicle?
Investor vehicle?
I mean, as far as just a...
No doubt a convertible note is by far the best. It would be even better if it was a convertible secured note, personally guaranteed by the founders. It gets better with each one of those, okay?
Bad chance.
But there's a point at which it's so burdensome that it turns off the entrepreneurs. And smart investors always have to be careful. They haven't structured a deal that really turns them off, and they lose all incentive. But I have never seen an investor actually collect on a convertible note. They use it as leverage, and they just get a better deal than they negotiate. And they grant an extension of 6 months to raise capital again. So it gives them serious leverage over the company. Josh?
Well, since Professor Grimm and I have been working on this a little bit lately, most investors will have their own terms, and it's not flexible. So if you go to an investment group that's actively investing, you like their terms or you don't like their terms. But if you're working with an angel investor or somebody who does not have such concrete and rigid terms, if you go to Y Combinator's website, they have different types of agreements on there, and they publish all the different types of agreements they use. But if you don't have a product that's ready for evaluation right now, they have something called SAFE, which is a simple agreement for equity. It does not have, it is a convertible.
It's called convertible security. It's not a note, it never comes due, right?
Yeah, it never comes due. So it has all the same characteristics of a note in that, as a convertible note, in that the valuation is not set at that time. It's set at the next round of equity investing, but it's much more friendly to the entrepreneur in that, it doesn't ever convert at some terribly low valuation. There's no gun to your head, there's no deadline.
Yeah, by the
for
way,
raising that equity.
Y Combinator has been a very successful business accelerator
Right.
in Silicon Valley. It used convertible notes for years. It decided it's too burdensome on entrepreneurs, and they came up with this fairly ingenious they call it convertible security. And it converts into whatever the next deal is, but it's not a note. And it doesn't have the gun to the head stuff. And they put their reasoning on their website as to why they did that. And it's because they don't want to turn off the entrepreneurs.
Well, and the underlying thing behind that, though, is if you're a Y Combinator company, they bring you into their accelerator and they surround you with a moat of advisors and force you to get to work every day raising money.
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
So that's kind of the opposite approach, but they've been very successful.
Yeah. Folks, we're out of time.
Yeah.
We switched this to once a quarter. So our next one will be 3 months from now. And it's going to be the last Friday. We couldn't do the last Friday because Thanksgiving. You'll get a notice and all that stuff, and we'll come up with a talk.
Y Combinator?
And it's always going to be related to this whole area of raising capital at that stage.
Yeah.
And if you could, please take your coffee cups out there, and if you love the sign, take the sign. No, you don't have to. And I'll hope to see you in 3 months.
Thanks for coming.